My mindset on compost is that it does not have to be perfect. In fact, if you try to get it perfect, then you will never actually do compost. The idea behind compost is to break down your food and paper product scraps as quickly as you can and turn them into a healthy soil. So the way you're going to do that is actually to use the microbes in the soil and in the air, all that good bacteria, and bugs will lay eggs and turn into worms and larvae and different things like that that'll help break down your compost. All you're going to need is some sort of container that has ventilation in it. Some people have a compost pile on the ground and they surround it with chicken wire or pallets, something like that that you can get air through. What you don't want is for your compost to be anaerobic, which means that it does not have air. And you'll know if your compost is anaerobic if it smells, if it's really slimy, if it's super dense and wet. You want it to be a little fluffier, and it might have a slight odor to it, but it shouldn't really have an odor that you can tell from like standing next to it. You should have to really get close to it to actually smell your compost. I had these 2 cheap plastic bins, and I drilled big holes in the sides and in the bottom, and those are my compost bins. I like to have 2 because I can't turn my bin very well. I try to use a shovel, but it doesn't work very well. When I dump the compost from one bin into the other, it kind of mixes itself up. So that's my version of turning. You don't really want a lid for your compost bin because it needs to be able to breathe and get to the air. However, I do have the lid from one of my bins that I set crossways over it so it doesn't snap on. It just provides a little bit of shelter simply because my bin does collect a lot of water if it rains. So that lid keeps off the majority of the rain, but it still allows for ventilation inside. The types of materials to put in your compost are classified in 2 sections, brown and green. Your green things are your really alive, dense, wet, moist things such as food scraps and like grass that you just cut. Your brown objects are like dead leaves, some little sticks, paper products, cardboard, things like that that don't really have any nutritional value per se, but they're really fibrous and they add a lot of body. You're going to want a very large percentage of brown items to green. Now this was really hard for me because I was collecting a lot of food scraps from the kitchen and just throwing them in my compost, but then I would always forget to go out and collect leaves and dry like grass and sticks and stuff. And so my compost was super dense and wet and it smelled. So basically what I was doing is putting all the food scraps on top of each other and compacting it down, and it didn't have the air and the correct carbon ratio to be able to compost. So it was just sitting there and rotting and stinking. So you need your brown materials. I've got my bin sitting right up next to my porch. It doesn't stink because I'm trying to do my compost correctly. So that makes it really easy to just throw food scraps in there. If you have a big problem with like raccoons or something, you might not want it super close to your house. I have found though that raccoons don't typically want to go through your scraps unless you have, say, a lot of maybe eggshells that have eggs still in them, or if you accidentally put in some meat or milk products or something that they would actually want. Because raccoons don't really want broccoli and grass, like, to be honest. Because I struggle with getting enough carbon in my compost, I have an old branch right here, and I'm going to strip off all the leaves and put them in a bucket and put it in my compost pile. I also take an effort to rip up paper and cardboard and things that I would throw away, and I put those in my compost pile because those are more like your carbons. Those are going to help with my too much nitrogen problem. If you struggle with finding enough carbon and brown stuff to put in your compost, please let me know. I want to know I'm not the only one. And if you do compost, what is the main kind of browns that you put in your compost? Because I could definitely use some more ideas. I tend to use mostly brown leaves, but they're really hard to come by, especially in the summer. You may have noticed that my compost bins aren't super big. They actually only hold a couple months worth of food scraps and carbon from our house with just 2 people. What I have done is just to dump my full compost onto this piece of cardboard in the tall grass in our backyard. This way it can continue to compost because, as you can see, it's not done yet. I'm going to keep coming out to this one and turning it every once in a while, but once it's done, I can just take a shovel to it and add it to our garden, or I could just spread it thinly on our grass or just toss it into the woods. Anything is better than just tossing those food scraps into the garbage. It reduces your waste and it provides a healthy, nutrient-dense soil for our land. Because it's kind of a pain to take our food scraps out of the house and put it in the compost bin every single time I'm cooking. I have this bucket just under our sink that I empty out once every day or every couple of days. I put eggshells, veggie scraps, paper scraps, cardboard, just about anything that is biodegradable. You don't want to put any meat or dairy scraps in here because those will attract varmints. Even for those of us who don't really know what we're doing and don't have the compost all figured out, it is definitely worth doing. You aren't going to learn if you don't give it a try, right? So I encourage you, get a compost bucket under your sink, get a compost bin outside your house, start composting, learn what kind of materials you can use as your browns and as your greens, and let me know in the comments if you're going to compost for the first time. Remember to love your people, work hard, and never stop learning. Bye!